अरे वाह! हेलो एवरीवन, सॉरी रियलाइज़ किया कि कि मैंने अपने आप को स्टेज पे ही नहीं डाला हुआ था। तो आई वाज़ लाइक यार क्यों नहीं आ रहा है? ये तो पहले सबसे बढ़िया चल रहा था। एनीवे सो आज का वेल जैसे आपने टाइटल देख लिया होगा, आई एम गोना बी डूइंग अनदर सॉर्ट ऑफ थोड़ा सीरियस डिस्कशन होगा ये। इट्स गोना बी a little long. I'm thinking it will probably run into 1 hour. And honestly, Aj, again, we'll be going over the Canadian grocery code, right? ये जो आया है क्या कि Canadian grocery code of conduct. And again, इसका actually what I'm going to do is पहले मैं एक थोड़ा background दूंगा. There's a whole article which came out in June 2025 जो एक डलहाउसी यूनिवर्सिटी के प्रोफेसर ने एज एन ओपिनियन पीस लिखा था. दिस इज फॉर द टोरंटो सन. अगेन उसका पूरा एज यू गाइस नो मैं हमेशा पूरी आपको वो आई गिव यू द एपीए राइट एपीए साइटेशन दे देता हूँ मैं आप लोगों को. तो अब क्या है यार, चल आई एम जस्ट गोना हैव टू ट्रस्ट इट कि ये सही चल रहा है. एनीवे so the thing is, the reason I wanted to do this is actually very critical for us as Canadians, right? Food inflation has been a big issue across the whole country. मतलब कोई से भी province के लोग हों, कोई भी territory के लोग हों, everyone's been affected by it. And obviously this year has been even more challenging than the rest because free trade is a myth now, and we all know for what reasons that is now the case, right? And luckily or unluckily aaj aur news aayi hai that the US trade deal is probably not going to get finalized before CUSMA is up for renegotiation. So CUSMA is the Canadian acronym used for the NAFTA treaty. वो अगले साल renegotiate होगी. And आज हमारे प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने दे दिया है कि statement दे दिया है कि it's probably not going to get signed anyway. It's not going to get signed before. Sorry, let me backtrack. It's any other fair trade agreement or free trade agreement or whatever you want to call it, कोई डील काजमा के रिव्यू से पहले तो साइन होने नहीं वाली है. So this becomes even more important. What Canada is doing domestically to ensure that its people can afford to eat. And in this context, I had actually done another live. Let me quickly dig that out. ये मैंने हर साल एक रिपोर्ट आती है, कनाडाज फूड प्राइस रिपोर्ट 2025. इस साल 15th एडिशन आया उसका. सो आई हैव डन अ लाइव ऑन दैट. ये 15 नवंबर को होगा, तो आप वो जाके देखिए. उसमें एक्चुअली आई हाईलाइटेड अ लॉट. अगेन दिस इज अ वेरी लॉन्ग डॉक्यूमेंट अबाउट कितना था ये. I've gone over the important pieces, but this was about I guess 34-35 page odd document जिसको मैंने पूरा पढ़ा था. I've done an analysis on how much it shows how much it is to actually live in Canada. Groceries उसका कितना part होता है generally, and I kind of actually luckily enough उसी दिन मैं grocery shopping भी गया था, तो मैंने एक receipt भी share की थी आपके साथ. So if you watch this live after that one as a pre-recorded video, then maybe it'll be better. But for those of you who are just going to be watching this one straight, let me sort of give you some background. And actually this is also, as I said, this is also from an article. So, एक second, let me put this on. Uh-huh. So ये article June 25th 2025 को आया था. Canada's easing food inflation. So by this time we were seeing some ease in food inflation. That's the article's claim. And again, as I said, this is an opinion. So, but I found the article itself, this opinion piece, very comprehensive. It kind of went over what the issue was, what were some of the previous steps taken to sort of try and sort it out, and then some of the backlash that happened because of that, and finally where the government landed saying, "Yeah, chal, this is the way to go." Right now, apart from all the shrinkflation news that we get, and then Canadian grocers colluding to sort of keep the prices increased. उनकी bottom line बढ़ गई है, even though their bottom line is increased more than what post-COVID measures would have warranted, even, right? ये सब news हमने देखी है. So when it comes to food inflation, यहाँ पे article में लिखा है government intervention should be focused, measured, and limited. So again, this article argues for freer markets to operate, but it doesn't say let's completely leave it, right? It is saying that hold on, government still has a role to play in terms of providing a framework. There should be some sort of guardrails put, but they shouldn't be over restrictive. So just weeks ago, again, this is from the perspective of June 25th. So June 25th, 2025. So, please keep that in mind. Just weeks ago, Canada had the second highest food inflation rate among G7 nations. Now we have moved down to the fourth place. It's a welcome reprieve into the costly summer months when fresh food demand typically peaks. Now, there's an important section in the article. I've actually gone over all the sections, highlighted some of the key statements as you're seeing. So regional divergences, a country divided by grocery bills. This doesn't come as a surprise, given that Canada doesn't really have a free trade agreement with itself. I'm not exactly sure where we are in that process as a government. मैंने कुछ इस पे ज़्यादा ध्यान नहीं दिया इस समय. But this was a huge election campaign point of the Conservatives that, oh, we have to have a free trade agreement among the provinces and the territories. So it doesn't come as a surprise कि जो food prices हैं वो across the country are different, especially after you add the taxes and everything. And regardless of the tax regimes, you will almost never have consistent pricing, right? If you're growing something in a part of the country and you're selling it in the same part of the country, you expect it to just come for cheaper. If you're importing it, wherever the port of import is, will probably have the cheapest in the country, and then it has to travel within the country to get to a location. So obviously, वो ज़्यादा expensive हो जाएगा. But obviously, I can. Vancouver is one of the major ports, and यहाँ पे तो कुछ सस्ता नहीं है भाई. Food inflation is not uniform across the country. New Brunswick leads the pack with the highest food inflation at 3.7. Manitoba is the lowest, 3%. Quebec at 3.1. Ontario at 3.6. इसमें BC का नहीं है दिया हुआ, but I would just, let's say, typically it'll be it'll be a little more than Quebec, I would guess, and somewhere less than Ontario. Up 3.3 मान लो. Mota, I think that number would be in about 20% of that. The regional differences reflect varying transportation costs, abhi jaise maine bola, supply chain efficiencies, and even policy priorities, because provinces have a lot of autonomy on how to govern themselves. There are very few areas that the federal government actually has a lot to say. Some may argue that's increasing a little more than it should. But again, that's not the point of this live. So I'll probably cover that up in another video. At the category level, meat products and fruit continue to drive inflation higher. Yes. Again, I'm not a meat consumer per se at home. So as far as groceries are concerned, we hardly have meat. But I can easily say that fruits have become more and more expensive. Um, Again, there was something. There was a little bit of behavior in Canada around. I think it's still persisting that there's a boycott of American products. It was informal, but it was happening. So that kind of led to prices going up because now the Canadian producers can charge you higher because they know there's a preference for their product. Um, Silent shift, the quiet pause on counter tariffs. Actually, this was very silent. Um, I didn't realize this till I would say about a month and a half back that we actually had paused all counter tariffs, almost all. So again, this article is pointing that out, and it was done as far back as June 2025. So yeah, I guess they were able to, you know, just put this under wraps as needed. Again, I think it was a sensible decision overall because, as I've said this in my previous lives, right? Let US do US. They have a leader, they have a government, they are going in a certain way. Not everything that Canada does has to be retaliatory, right? At some point, the Canadian administration, the Canadian government is for Canadians first. If it hurts putting counter tariffs, then don't put them, right? And eventually, when you're in a position maybe that you have enough supply, then you can think about it again. If there is still a hunger to retaliate, right? So I think I think this was a sensible move. Of course, politically speaking, it would it would wreak havoc for any government in Canada, not just liberals or conservative. If any government were to do this, it wouldn't go down politically that well for them. So that's why I guess they were very quiet about the whole thing. Now, as we all remember, at the end of 2024, there was a GST holiday. I think it started end of 2024, and then it went into the first couple of months of 2025, where it, this was supposed to be a good thing. And yeah, on my grocery bill, I would definitely see a decrease, right? But overall, it was, and I agree with that. It was a little misguided because I'm in the space. Like I have been uh, in projects in areas where we have had to, uh, implement these kind of systems for companies. And when you configure a system of this sort, like let's say you have an ERP system, enterprise resource planning system, um, when you have to configure it according to the requirements of whoever your client is, and all these companies have it configured in a certain way that okay, if I'm in BC, this much 5% tax. If I'm in Ontario, blah blah, HST, GST, whatever. I think Quebec has a QST, Quebec sales tax, and everything. So all of these are configured, pre-configured in the system, and then you suddenly say it's zero for 2 months. It's not straightforward. It's not easy at all. Even some people may think, oh, abhi GST zero hi to karna hai. No, it technically you could just turn that into zero, but when it comes to closing books just for those 2 months, and if those 2 3 months for whatever this time period was, when it straddles quarters, it becomes even more challenging, because now let's say you start in December and then I think the GST reprieve was till the end of February. So December is the last quarter of 2024. So for that 1 month, all transactions have no GST, versus October and November did have the GST. So closing the books becomes very difficult. You're literally having to go down at the transaction level, making sure that oh अच्छा भी दिसंबर में आया तो हमें GST नहीं देना है. Then again, same thing in Jan and Feb, right? So Jan, Feb, and March is the first quarter of the next year. And again, closing books becomes a nightmare. Now you have to make sure Jan, Feb में GST नहीं है versus March में है. So it creates a headache for accounting, for the financial departments of these companies to try and account for everything. I think a lot of the vendors, they try to just basically say, okay, we'll charge you, but then we'll give you some money back. It was a mess. Um, so I think it was well intentioned, but it was also very short sighted. Because typically, when you make a change like this to any sort of any ERP system, you're going to have to test it, make sure it works, and then do a deployment. And then in deployment, invariably, there are issues. There is never a feature rollout. There is never a rollout to production from your test environment where it will always pass your tests. That's the only way you actually move something to production. But you'll always have issues in production as well. And that's just the nature of technology. And everyone who thinks AI will solve your problems, no, it won't. Again, different topic, but AI doesn't solve all your problems. AI can give you some innovative test cases, but there's no guarantee that the code or the configuration of the software will work exactly as expected in production. And there are too many reasons to go into for that, and I won't waste time over here for this. So moving on to the next one, right? So the solution basically was that when it comes to food inflation, again, this I said this line before, comes to food inflation, government intervention should be focused, measured, and limited. So again, provide a framework. Long story short, creating the right conditions for market fairness and competition is essential, and that's where the much desired grocery code of conduct comes in. So now we are getting into the topic of the day, which is this document that has been put forth. It's going to go into effect by January 1st. I don't think this date has changed. Um, and basically, it says such a code is necessary because listing fees, marketing levies, and chargebacks have long been used to squeeze suppliers, particularly small businesses. These costs inevitably make their way onto consumers' receipts. So, one thing to understand is this grocery code of conduct is more to sort of maybe protect suppliers. And for those who may not understand what a supplier is, you have the farmers who are growing products, who are growing, I guess not growing products, but they're growing crops. They are livestock farmers, so they're giving you meat, poultry, dairy items. And then you have suppliers who basically take all this product from farmers, put them in one big space, and then sell them to retailers. And retailers is your uh, whatever store you go to, Safeway, Save On, Metro, IGA, No Frills, etc., Walmart. So these are sort of the middlemen. But what's been happening so far is suppliers are being sort of squeezed. I don't understand this entirely, but there is an argument made here. And again, I'll trust it because of the reputation of the person who has written it. He's again, Sylvain Charlebois. He's a professor at Dalhousie University, and he's been a professor in this space for a long time, agriculture, agribusiness, etc. So this guy knows what he's talking about. So let's go next one. Okay. So यहाँ पे what I've done is kind of, this section is pretty long. This document is about 12 pages. I won't go over every nook and cranny, but whatever I've found very important, I've kind of put that over here. So the objectives are, I think they're pretty much in line with what this article was saying. So objectives are contribute to a thriving and competitive grocery industry, recognizing the needs of all stakeholders in the grocery value chain, realities of the Canadian marketplace. That I think is it's a good point to put. And I think this reflects back on even the government, right? That okay, we can't afford counter tariffs. It's very simple. I think it reflects that, but maybe they meant something else here. But they have called out that okay, there are certain things that are unique to the Canadian market, and they should be considered when you're making a Canada grocery code of conduct. It shouldn't just be retaliatory, or it shouldn't just be a knee-jerk reaction. Importance of ESG principles. Okay, promote reciprocal trust and collaboration amongst grocery value chain partners. So again, this is focusing on the fact that, okay, suppliers have been squeezed in the past and retailers have had a huge sort of monopoly. Not monopoly, quite a few retailers, but they have basically held the upper hand in this relationship. And this code of conduct is trying to sort of bridge that gap. Effective allow all parties to make informed business decisions in a context of commercial certainty governed by clear agreements. So a lot of this document actually focuses on the agreement between the retailer and the supplier. And as we get into the specifics, you will see what that means. Effective equitable mechanism for resolving commercial disputes. There's a whole section dedicated to dispute management. I do have some grievances there, but again, we'll get to it when we get to it. In particular, something to note, I'm at the bottom here, sorry. Yeah. In particular, compliance with this code does not restrict the application of the Competition Act to any person or otherwise imply or require deviation from a party's applicable regulatory and legal compliance obligations. Mota mota, what this is saying, largely speaking, is okay, if you if the local laws, if all the applicable law is in conflict with whatever this code of conduct is saying, then the law will apply. You can't use code of conduct as a way of getting out of following the law, roughly speaking, which makes sense because the governing law is always supreme. Code aims to bring transparency and certainty to commercial dealings with a preference for parties to avoid ambiguity through clear agreements. So, as I pointed out, this code of conduct focuses a lot on the agreement between the retailer and the supplier. Now, some points to think about when we go over the fair dealing and the simplicity sections. All parties are expected to act in good faith. Now, good faith here is capitalized because it's a legal term. But even if you wanted to understand what good faith is, it more or less means what we use in local parlance. Good faith, matlab, be honest, be trustworthy, don't backstab. Those are things that come under good faith. Code does not limit competition or negotiate any agreement if it is within the bounds of the code. So as long as you're a signatory to the code, any agreement that you strike with any supplier or any agreement that happens between two parties have to be within the bounds of the code. Code does not require a party to purchase a product from or supply a product to another party. There is no restrictions on whom you buy from or whom you sell to. Code should be easy to understand and comply with, and as we'll see, it is written in a fairly simple language. So kudos to that. Code applies to all retailers and suppliers. Will come into compliance from Jan 1st, 2026. Okay, let's move. So now for the next few slides, I've basically highlighted. So there are a lot of bullet points, clauses, whatever you want to call them under the code, under many sections. I have taken a few of the important ones, the ones that I found interesting, the ones I felt I have something to say. So parties are encouraged to enter into written agreements, including amendments defining the commercial terms agreed to by the parties as the chief vehicle for ensuring certainty, clarity, and transparency in commercial relationships. For anyone who has read technical documents of this nature before, this statement is pretty normal. It's pretty generic. However, and this is where this gets interesting, however, the code does not obligate parties to conclude written agreements as a condition for entering into a commercial relationship. For some sectors and smaller size companies, written agreements may be too time consuming or otherwise burdensome, and in some cases, parties may wish to operate without an overarching agreement at first before clarifying terms in writing. I think this is I personally feel, again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a legal background, but I've been around contracts enough to to get a feeling that this is a little bit of a get out of jail free card for whoever we want to for whoever may want to use it as that, right? Because it's saying, acha, sometimes if the supplier is very small, you may not have time to do an agreement, so please, it's okay, you don't need one. Where this could have been made better is this code itself, maybe as an appendix, gives a standard template, right? Of course, it's not always possible. There are unique instances. And every project that you do for a company, whatever, there'll always be unique instances. But if you're in too much of a hurry, you or if you don't have time, or if if it's a new relationship, you're trying out with one, a retailer is trying out, okay, one time order. Let's see, okay, we'll give you an order once, let's see how you do, and then we'll put something more formal in. At least have that one template agreement which both parties can sign, and that should have some protections against for the supplier, right? At the end of the day, we are bringing in this code to protect the suppliers. But again, if anyone with a legal background watches this, let me know what you think, because I I feel just giving a template of an agreement would help. You don't have to open the door for such exceptions. If you are a signatory to this code of conduct, then you have to have an agreement. That would have been what I would have liked to see. And again, this, you don't know how all these can be used, right? Your retailer can come and say, oh, I want this tomorrow, and you don't have time to get into a quote, so the supplier will give you something. Next thing you know, they're knocking at your door for some rubbish. You don't I mean, I can't speak for retailers either. I'm not Again, I'm not for or against retailers, I'm not for or against suppliers. I'm just saying, just having such a side door always leads to complications. No party who conducts or intends to conduct business with another party shall purposely avoid or refuse entering into an agreement. I like this one, but again, you're saying in 2.1 that a written agreement may not be mandatory, but now you're saying you cannot refuse entering into an agreement. A little, at least to my non-legal brain, I think there is a little bit of a conflict in these two statements. And if it can be revised, rectified, if anyone, I'm seeing zero viewers right now, so I guess it's just not going to get to anyone uh, in time. But if anyone ever listens to this, maybe this could be corrected in some way. Now, two other interesting points. In the absence of an agreement, payment will be made within a reasonable time frame after the date of the invoice. Again, when you look at the definition section of this document, and there's no accompanying appendix, at least not in the PDF that I have. Um, Again, reasonable time frame, please define it. Don't leave all of this language. That's why having a template would have been more helpful. If you have a template agreement, if you just have a standard agreement, if you're in a hurry, you can sign this. It's as balanced as it can be. It follows the code. Here you are. And anyone and everyone who's signing on to become, who are signatories to this code of conduct, they can always see the standard agreement. They can talk to the body that's creating this, have a discussion with them, and then finally have a template. You don't have to use it. It can be optional, but there should be an agreement in which you can say, okay, 30 days payment, 45 days payment. What is reasonable, right? Again, if anyone with a legal framework is watching this, let me know if this is common. For me, again, whenever something is not defined, I feel lost. If it's just a word, Okay, what is reasonable? Net 32% discount if paid in 10 days. What is it? Just give me something. Just give me something to start with. And then we can modify it as needed. It is highly recommended that payment terms be defined in an agreement. Okay, अब तुम कह रहे हो कि agreement में define कर लो, but तुम कह रहे हो कि agreement भी जरूरी नहीं है कभी कभी. So again, a little bit of a contradiction. It should be sorted out. Very simple. Okay, next one. Um, there were a few sections I was like, "Achha, this is quite generic," so I kind of left it. If you want to read the document, I've put it in the description again. You can just literally type in Google Canada Grocery Code of Conduct, and this will be the first thing that will pop up. But again, I want to focus. I found this one quite interesting. Ad hoc charges for non-compliance with the terms of an agreement, where a dispute cannot be resolved within the reasonable notice period. Again, no definition of a reasonable notice period. How many days, how many weeks, months, percentage, nothing. The other party shall not deduct the disputed sum from a trading account or otherwise money owed for products unless the challenge is resolved, unless the charging party demonstrates acting reasonably that the challenge is vexatious or wholly without merit. Now, this needs to be unpacked because this is a very long sentence. So, if you can't resolve a dispute within quote unquote a reasonable amount of time, the other party cannot deduct the disputed sum. Let's say there's a fight over $10 from a trading account or otherwise money owed for products. So let's say I'm a retailer, there's a dispute going on with a supplier, it's not resolved in a reasonable amount of time. The money I owe my supplier for the products cannot be deducted from a trading account, even if the dispute is not resolved. Unless I, as a retailer, can prove that what the supplier is saying, or if the supplier proves that the retailer, the counterparty, is saying that the challenge is entirely vexatious or wholly without merit. Just because there's a dispute going on doesn't mean you don't make your payments, which I feel is a good thing in this code, especially in the case where a retailer may be making a claim against a supplier that acha main nahi dunga paise, right? Just because there's a dispute going on, you have to doesn't mean मैं पैसा रोक के रखूंगा. Once the dispute is resolved, it may be that okay, the supplier has to pay back the money, maybe even with a penalty. But if you're trying to protect suppliers, I think this is a good way to do it. Payment for price matching, provisions under which a supplier makes a payment or allowance to a retailer as compensation for a retailer's price matching program are discouraged. I found the statement interesting, but again, I'm just not too knowledgeable on what impact this could or could not have. You are saying that a supplier cannot make a payment or an allowance to a retailer as compensation for a retailer's price matching program. I think it's a very moral statement. I'm glad that it's there, but again, this is coming from a very non-economic perspective. Because my hypothesis here is this can lead to a lot of, again, the whole problem of, the retailer trying to squeeze the supplier, because you don't even create a situation for any extra payment or allowance in the first place. And then you sort of ensure that, okay, no squeezing can happen. That's my take on this. Please correct me if I'm wrong or if I've understood this incorrectly. I'm happy to be corrected. So please do feel free to comment on this one. Time of third-party goods or services, where an activity requires the use of a third party, goods or use of third-party goods or services, a party can directly or indirectly require the other party to obtain any such goods, services, or properties from a third party, provided that the party source for those goods, services, or property meets reasonable objective standards relating to quality, blah, 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 and then is provided at a cost that is competitive and reasonable, taking into account the circumstances of the party. So it's taking into account that, okay, if a supplier is getting some items from a third party, it should be basically acquired by the supplier at a reasonable price. Or for that matter, any party in the agreement, if they want third party services, it should basically be acquired at a reasonable arm's length, fair dealing price. Again, this is where I would say, okay, you can't really define an amount. You can't do much about it. It has to be fair. It has to be just a reasonable amount. And in some, and if I would say, just to make sure that nothing happens in the background, these third party agreements should be reviewed. I have studied for the CFA exam in the past, and there's a huge section on financial ethics when it comes to that. When it comes, there's a huge section on ethics in the CFA exam, and one of those is around, okay, if you have a third party agreement, uh, then reveal it to your employer, reveal it to your customer. You have to get written permission and all these things. So I think it just makes sense for a clause like this to be added in the name of transparency, in the name of fair dealing. Yep, I think nothing much to say over here. Okay, let's go to the next one. Array, change new one. Let's go to here, 7th. So, good faith forecasting, ordering, and allocation of supply. Each party should prepare their own forecast in good faith, taking into consideration relevant factors. So, this is basically saying demand planning, supply planning. Retailers and suppliers should then collaborate and mutually agree on forecasts in accordance with processes and protocols relevant to each category of product and subject to confidentiality agreements. I am curious to learn, and again, I haven't been able to dig too deep into this, but why is this not already happening? I would have assumed that retailers and suppliers get together. You know, your retailer predicts, okay, I can sell X amount of cheese in the next quarter. Your supplier says, okay, I can give you this much. And you get to an agreement of some sort. I'm surprised it's not already happening, or maybe it's happening and they felt it should just be included in this code. I'm not sure why they felt that, okay, this should be called out. I would have thought that this is pretty obvious. So, retailer shall prepare and issue purchase orders, and a supplier shall fulfill orders based on applicable agreed to forecast in good faith, subject to force majeure events. Fair enough. Force majeure, if any of you watching need a definition, it's basically force majeure events are events out of your control. If either party fails to a material degree to reasonably act in accordance with mutually planned forecasts, the parties will work cooperatively on mitigation in a timely manner. Of course, this is all, I mean, it's given, this would happen. And again, this is one place where I would almost be okay with some ambiguous language, in the sense that reasonably act in accordance with, if either party fails to a material degree, you can't necessarily define material degree in such contexts. So it kind of makes sense that they use these words. And again, this would be more if a dispute sort of results from something like this, then yeah, you would be going to a lawyer, you would be going to the courts, or at least at least a lawyer, and it could just be an out of court settlement. By total demand products exceeds available supply, suppliers will take into consideration all requested orders from all retailers. The way I read this is, and I'm happy to be corrected, the way I read this is all orders that a supplier receives are equal. It doesn't mean that, okay, now you can't supply in accordance with the demand for whatever reason. You can't just say, Acha, this one is giving me less money, I won't supply them. This one's giving me more money, I'll supply them. It doesn't go into detail on how the distribution should happen in such a case, but maybe there's already a legal text which will define this. Suppliers will take into consideration all requested orders from all retailers. So again, will take into consideration. I would have liked to see a little more definition to this, because at one point I understand you're trying to make life easier for the suppliers. But again, it shouldn't go so far in one direction that, okay, now the retailers are starting to feel the pain. So if there's an agreement in place to supply at a certain price, again, I guess this should be just a part of the agreement or the contract that they sign, that, okay, you will consider all of them equally, or maybe some sort of a pro rata basis of allocation. Again, this comes from my background with passing CFA exams, is that whenever you have an oversubscribed IPO, there's a whole section in the ethics part of the CFA code of ethics is, okay, how do you deal with when you have an oversubscribed IPO? You don't favor your most highest fee paying clients always. You have to have a pro rata basis of allocating stocks to everyone who's paying you money for it. And then you can, then later on, you can say, okay, we were oversubscribed, sorry, we could only allocate this much to you, blah, blah, blah. There are rules around, okay, if there are any fee paying family accounts versus non family accounts, all that good stuff. It's very well defined. And of course, in that case, the code and standards only, well, they have to apply all the time. But in case the code and standards are in conflict with local laws prevail. But then you have to call that out. It's much more comprehensive. This is just a 12-page document. Again, if I find more detailed definitions of all these things, I'll just put them in the description. And if you guys request, we can actually go over those in detail as well. But yeah, again, this opens the door a little bit to the suppliers to, whoever gives them the most money, they supply to them first, unless their agreement explicitly calls out that you can't do that. Again, I'm not privy to contracts that retailers and suppliers sign with each other, so I'm not sure to what extent all this is already taken care of. Guidelines relating to supplier cost changes. Parties should set out in an agreement the level of notice and information required in order to properly negotiate and decide upon cost change proposals, including cutoff times for acceptance, rejection, and effective dates. Again, what this is saying is you can't just arbitrarily one day change the price at which you want to sell. You have to give some notice. You have to give the retailer some leeway to try and figure out an alternative supplier if needed. I think that's a positive thing to have, just because, again, you do want to protect your suppliers, but you don't want to make it go so far in one direction that now the other side is feeling, okay, not fair to us anymore. 4.10, you guys can read it if you want, Nico. I'm not the most well-equipped to analyze such level of detail, but I'll just read it out for any of you who are just plainly listening. Any dispute regarding the magnitude of any supplier cost increase is exempt from the DRMP. DRMP is a disagreement resolution, some MP, but anyway, dispute resolution management procedure. Yeah. So DRMP, to the extent that parties have included terms in their agreement pursuant to Section 4.9 related to procedures to be followed in respect of such cost increases, such procedures shall be subject to the dispute resolution procedures set out in Section 6, including referral to the DRMP. Okay, I'll try to break this down a bit. Any dispute regarding the magnitude of supplier cost increase is exempt from the DRMP. So by default, if there is a dispute between a retailer and a supplier for the magnitude of a cost increase from the supplier, it's exempt from the DRMP unless it's been included to be dealt in such a way in the agreement that they have signed, which is then pursuant of 0.4.9. Which then, if you lay it out in your agreement that okay, you have any price increases, then if it results in a dispute, then we have to go to the DRMP as defined by the code of conduct. Only then will it actually be considered a part of following the code of conduct. That's my way of thinking about it. Let's go on. Neat. Okay, guys, we're almost through the woods. Dispute resolution, again, another very interesting part. Again, there is a couple of sections that I have not covered just because from whatever I could read and understand, they were pretty, generic. They should be there. It's surprising that they were not already there, but now that they are there, it's, I would say it's overall a net positive. Parties should have clear dispute resolution and escalation mechanisms set out in their agreements, if any. So again, this goes back to what we just read. Agreement should be calling out how to resolve disputes. A key principle of dispute resolution under code will be that parties should first exhaust all internal dispute resolution escalation mechanisms set out in agreements prior to resorting to the DRMP. Basically, कह रहा है कि okay, so try to sort it out among yourselves before you have to go to the DRMP. Basically, if the agreement is silent on a dispute resolution, let's say you didn't consider a case, you put in a very solid agreement, but yeah, you missed out an edge case, and now that has resulted in reality. Then the following steps should be fully exhausted as a precondition of either party referring any dispute relating to the agreements or the code to the DRMP. So the dispute should be reviewed by the representative as set out in section 5.1 in a timely, effective manner. Okay, pretty obvious. If a dispute is still unresolved, dispute should be escalated to a designated member of the senior management for each party. Go to the bosses, let them sit and figure it out if possible, with a decision to be provided to the parties in a timely and effective manner. So again, it's basically saying, okay, escalate it within your organizations first. Let the bosses talk. If you still can't reach a resolution, then go to the DRMP. So this is pretty standard procedure because as soon as you go to some sort of a formal body, you get too much media attention. You'll have people on social media just beating their chests and everything. So I think it makes sense. Try to sort it out internally. If it really doesn't work out, then go to a body. Because again, almost always everyone is better off if something doesn't have to blow to a proportion that may not necessarily be warranted. Now, I'm not a judge or anything to decide what should blow out of proportion or not. Ultimately, what needs to get out in the open will get out in the open in some form or the other. But try to sort out your fight yourselves before making it formal issue, which then invariably leads to public attention. Reasonable notice means a period of notice set out in the agreement or in the absence of any provision in the agreement, a period of notice, the reasonableness of which will depend on the circumstances of the individual case, including but not limited to factors such as the duration of the agreement, the characteristics of the relevant products, and then value of any relevant order, the nature of the matter and circumstances, the existence of a force majeure event. Now, here is where, again, a reasonable notice period need not necessarily be, you can set out as a default, right? Again, one of the points I've been trying to make throughout the review of this document is, okay, why don't we just have a standard agreement in place? Now, as we will see in the next slide, there are actually categories called out. So for the products in these categories, you can pretty much make reasonable, ballpark estimations on the durability, seasonality, and external factors that affect their production, right? Maybe external factors, you can't capture everything, but you can capture enough to just say, okay, if this is this product, this is your standard reasonable notice time period, or this is your standard payment period, or this is your standard um, anything else where there is dispute resolution time frame, right? Maybe the dispute resolution time frame doesn't have to be for the product class. You can just say that, okay, you end up in a dispute with the retailer supplier not getting along, try to resolve it in these many days. If not, you know then escalate it to your party, then escalate it internally, blah blah blah. You can set out a rough framework. At the end of the day, the from my experience, the more you can quantify, the better such documents work. Otherwise, what starts happening is everyone will have an opinion on what these words mean. And more often than not, the party with more backing, with more money, with more presence, often ends up winning. And at that point in time, you can't say that this was wrong. They followed the code, they followed the law, they followed whatever was laid out as a signatory to this code of conduct. They followed whatever is written in this code of conduct. Now, the counter argument usually comes in the form that, okay, this becomes too long, becomes too cumbersome, no one has the time to read it, no one is telling you to read everything. You have a 15-20 page introduction, and then you just point to the specific sections wherever you need more information. Okay, standard agreement, please go to appendix 1. Okay, you want definition of this term? Okay, appendix 2 has a definition. So the person just goes to that section, whatever they want, they get it. They don't have to read 100 pages, 200 pages. But this is just my take on this. And again, I'm not a legal person. But the more you can quantify, especially when it comes to things like reasonable notice. What was the other one? Let me go back. Where was this one? Reasonable notice period again. Material. I think there was something around materiality. Materiality, I can understand. Sometimes you can have a definition, and sometimes it just has to be in good faith. So okay, I can never pass on that. Okay, last one, guys. We're there. Now, here is what's, again, for this, you have to go into the definition section. What's included and what's not. Categories included all food categories, which is bakery, deli, grocery, meat, seafood, produce, and then non-food categories where HABA, household products, paper products, pet food, And then I'm not going to go over everything in the subsection, but TK, they have defined what groceries are, and then categories not included. Basically, anything that you don't buy for making food in your house in some form or the other. Um, Again, they have also included some common household items, not necessarily used for cooking, but just for living. So I think they have done a good job with the categories. It's pretty exhaustive. Um, you could argue back and forth about some of them, but I feel I'm pretty happy with what I see as included in this versus not included in this. Because just looking at my own grocery bills for the past 2, 3 odd years, yeah, typically you do your weekly grocery run. These are the categories they have included are the items that get purchased. If you have a car, okay, you're gonna buy automotive stuff, but of course, apparel, there is no end to buying apparel. So um, I don't know if I could call apparel groceries. Not not really. Again, cosmetics, okay, that's they're more of a style choice. The kind of life you want to live is the kind of cosmetics you get. So um, not having included that is fine. Newspapers, books, again, I think you could make a fair argument that all the categories are that are not there should actually not be there. I would say the strongest argument for me be moving a category into inclusion is maybe floral and garden, because some people do, a lot of people actually just grow their own vegetables. Um, if anything, again, on average, I would expect floral and garden to not be a huge monthly expense, only for people who could probably afford a house with a garden. And then even there, only not all the people who have houses with gardens are actually maintaining a garden. So you could argue both ways over there. But I mean, if there was one category where I would say there can be an argument for including it as a grocery item, it could be floral. Let me know what your thoughts are. Again, overall, I feel this is pretty good. This is pretty well thought out. Now, let's quickly, before we sign off for the day, I'm gonna actually go to the URL that I've provided, and then show you who all have signed up for this already. Grocery code of conduct, and let's see, membership, membership directory. And I'm actually quite happy to say that all the big Canadian grocers have signed up for this. So let me just let me quickly share that with you guys, because I think that's worth looking at. Um, mhm. Share screen, share screen, open. अरे यार, ठीक है, कर देगा. Okay. Oh wow, I can't use my fingerprint. Interestingly, allow later. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can just now try and share screen. Okay, sorry guys, I'm not going to be able to do that, because unless I rejoin, I won't be able to show it, because Google Chrome didn't have those permissions. I'll just quickly call out the major ones that we are all used to buying food items from. One is IGA. I'm not sure what IGA is, but Alimentation Kotiakok. So that retailer has signed on. Barilla, all the pasta, all the pasta items and the Italian food items you get. Bayersdorf, La Baguette, Bob Bakery World. These are some of the very well-known ones that I have come across pretty much in every superstore. Canadian Independent Grocery Buyers Alliance, Cinnarol, CBL Bakeries, Chapman's Ice Cream, Conagra Brands, Coleman's. I think I've seen Cloverleaf as well. So they are members of this code of conduct. Um, Dr. Utker, Earth's Own. So if you're into any alternative types of milk, Earth's Own is a very well-known brand in that space. Um, let's see, Co-op, Federated Cooperatives Limited. Again, these are wholesalers. Ferrero Canada, interesting. Great to see them here. Again, if I'm, yeah, North York, okay. Let's see, IGA, again, the Sestian Genest Inc. Not sure how the other IGA is different from this one, but again, I'm seeing it, so I'm calling it out. I think I have basically Island Growers, Kawartha Dairy. So they are members. Kasler Food Products Inc. Okay, Keurig Dr. Pepper. Okay, Kraft Heinz Canada has signed on to this. Loblaw companies. So Loblaws have a lot of brands under them. I'll just quickly call these out. So if Loblaws Companies Limited has signed, that means Real Canadian Superstore, No Frills, Fortinos, Provigo, Shoppers Drug Mart, they are all under Loblaws, so they by themselves are now signatories to this code of conduct. Let's see. McCormick for seasoning, Metro is here. I think Patterson Food Group, a big one. Ocean Spray, another big one. Okanagan Specialty Fruits, big one for those living in BC. Let's see. Popwell Supermarket. I've never seen them, but okay. Let's go here. Probably getting to the end of this because we are already at S. Yeah, Yoplait, another popular yogurt brand. At least I know them for their yogurt. If they're selling other stuff, sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head. Wildly Delicious Preserve Company. Again, if anyone's ever heard of this, let me know. Kellogg Canada Corp has signed on for this. Ah, that reminds me. Johnson and Son. The Clorox Company of Canada has signed. PepsiCo Canada is going to adhere to this one. Reynolds Consumer Products. Okay. Okay. So Kruger Products, another one. Lady York Foods. Okay. I think we have covered all the major grocery retailers and suppliers that we come across in our daily life in Canada, and all of them uh, have the membership of this Canada Grocery Code. So they will all be now adhering to this code of conduct. So, guys, let me know what you think on how beneficial or not so beneficial it would be for the Canadian consumer. One thing before I sign off, I would like to leave everyone with is okay, there is a whole framework on how the retailers and suppliers are going to deal with each other. And to the credit of the government, the food inflation has been brought down. There have been some very intelligent decisions taken in terms of, no counter tariffs. We keep our ego aside. We do what we need to do as Canada, as Canadians. So I think that's all good. I also agree that okay, the government should not be getting into too much of price regulation and everything. One point that I did not find covered here is shrinkflation. And this is probably not the right document to cover this in, because you're looking at, okay, grocery code of conduct, how the suppliers and retailers are going to behave with each other, right? And when we go back to to sort of what's included, right, in these categories, again, this is not meant, uh, I guess, yeah, prepared foods is there. So prepared foods, food wrap, confectionery, snacks. So all of this falls under this code of conduct. I would have liked to see a little bit more on, your food companies can't just reduce the size and increase the price. I don't see anything specifically called out. But again, I'd want to caveat that, okay, I'm not a legal person. So maybe it's included in some clause, some sort of a statement. Let me know. Please point me to that place if it's addressed in some in language that I'm not able to grasp onto. Because I think if there is one thing that has contributed to inflation is what you could call shrinkflation. Size of products is, packaging is decreasing, the quantity you're getting is decreasing, while the price is either staying the same or, yeah, ever so slightly increasing. So I'm not sure what a good law around stopping shrinkflation would be. But I also understand that as the administration is trying to step away from business, and I think the realization in general in Canada is that, okay, the government is too far into things where may not need to be there. At some places, let the free market forces also um, also do their bit, play out as needed. But again, in Canada, when we see there is sort of very few options. Again, this goes into different, completely different chain of thought, that how do we encourage competition among retailers, among suppliers, among product manufacturers, actually, on, so that they themselves are disincentivized from reducing the size of their products, because if they do it, someone else will sell a bigger package for the same price. um, I think it's time that we all start looking in that direction as well. And then a document like that can complement this grocery code of conduct. And then we can see shrinkflation being curbed in some way or the other. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think. Thank you for your time. If you're watching on the East Coast, maybe maybe you can maybe it's time for maybe it's getting closer to the bedtime. Have a great Friday. Have a great coming weekend. I will be on for some more episodes throughout the week, so I'm not going to wish you best for the holidays yet. But yeah, see you guys soon again. Have fun. Ciao, ciao.